The massive steel doors groaned open with the weight of a dying world, and every alien warlord on the throne dais shifted in their seats, eager to see the legendary Earth diplomat who had dared to request a meeting. When the human finally stepped through, dragging a limp foot behind him and leaning heavily on a battered cane, the great hall of warlords erupted into snickering. It was, perhaps, the last mistake they would ever make. Cloaked in a simple black uniform without medals, without guards, without even a weapon, the man appeared more like a battered archivist than an envoy from the defiant world of Earth. His hair was graying at the temples, his smile was calm and slow, and he had the look of someone who had already made peace with death. To the gathering of alien conquerors, he was a gift, a weakling human, sent to beg for Earth's mercy, offering up a spectacle they could gloat about for years to come. General Tarka, the Tarkani's warlord whose conquests stretched across 7 systems, was the first to mock openly. He rose from his thorn throne, flexed his massive claws, and gave a grand theatrical bow to the human. The others followed, slapping the stone floor with their scaled feet, their tentacles, their armored fists, creating a wave of derisive applause. The human diplomat paused just inside the doorway, raised one eyebrow as if considering whether to engage or leave, and then, to the warlord's utter delight, continued forward at a slow, deliberate pace. His cane tapped the cold floor with each step, an almost comic rhythm compared to the booming laughter echoing off the metal walls. Ambassador, one of the senior guards sneered as he passed, voice dripping with false respect. The human inclined his head politely and offered a soft smile, but said nothing. This only fueled the aliens' amusement. They mocked his frail form, his outdated style of dress, the fact that he had come alone without bodyguards or protection. Someone shouted that Earth had finally accepted its place under alien boots. Another jeered that they might use him as a training dummy before the feast. And yet, through it all, the human never faltered. If anything, his slow walk seemed to draw a taut string of tension through the air, one that only a few in the room noticed, a whisper of discomfort buried under the hilarity. Reaching the center of the war chamber, the human stopped and bowed low, his cane slipping into the crook of his arm with practiced ease. "Greetings from Earth," he said simply, his voice clear but gentle, almost grandfatherly. He announced that he came bearing terms of negotiation, and offered to avoid unnecessary bloodshed and foster new relations between Earth and the warlord clans. The translation devices hummed, processing his words into hundreds of dialects, but the meaning was the same across all of them. Earth was offering peace, and the warlords found it hilarious. One younger alien commander, a thin, sharp-eyed creature named Krelth, cocked his head at the human's chest, squinting at something only he seemed to notice. Beneath the simple black jacket, faintly stitched onto the left breast pocket, was an insignia, not the Earth diplomatic seal or any planetary alliance crest, but a strange crimson symbol, almost ancient in design. It resembled a broad-bladed axe, tipped in blood-red thread. Krelth leaned toward his elder, whispering uncertainly, but the elder dismissed him with a wave. Another joke, another human attempt to appear fierce, he assumed. Who fears a symbol when the flesh beneath it is so fragile? Still, as the human removed his jacket and laid it neatly across the war table, revealing the insignia in full, a silence began to creep around the edges of the room. It wasn't the insignia itself that struck fear, it was the complete, casual way the human revealed it, as if he knew it was unnecessary to explain it at all. Like a tiger showing its teeth before deciding if it was worth the energy to pounce. Tarka, always the theatrical one, broke the growing silence with a thunderous laugh, stepping forward and gesturing grandly toward the human. "Tell us, little earthling," Tarka bellowed, "what titles do your people give to those who wear the blood axe? Peacemakers? Merchants? Farmers?" He roared with laughter again, joined by the rumbling chorus of the others. The human tilted his head slightly, considering the question as if it were serious. Then he smiled, a slow, almost apologetic stretch of his lips. "Executioners," he said. The laughter faltered, hesitated. A few of the younger warlords exchanged glances, unease flickering in their multicolored eyes. Legends and half-forgotten stories surfaced in the back of their minds, stories of a time when humans, newly risen from their cradle world, sent not politicians to the galactic councils, but warriors disguised as envoys. Stories of emissaries who, when disrespected, toppled empires in days. But surely that was ancient history. Surely Earth had changed, become civilized, weakened by peace and bureaucracy. Tarka sneered and leaned close, towering over the human. If you are executioner, he growled, then I am the holy starborn, chosen of the void. He reached out and with one massive hand, snatched the human's cane, intending to yank it away and humiliate the frail figure before him. The cane came free easily, too easily. And then, in a blink, the human's hand moved. A sharp crack echoed across the chamber as the human stepped forward, pivoted, and drove his heel directly onto Tarka's foot. The alien howled in pain, stumbling back as a fissure spiderwebbed across the armored boot of his exosuit. The cane, forgotten in Tarka's stunned grasp, clattered uselessly to the floor. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. The frail human stood there, no weapon, no armor, just a slow breath exhaled through his nose as he watched the warlord recover his balance. Across the dais, Krauth whispered again, louder this time. Executioners. The old breed. The humans never sent diplomats to battle councils. They sent them to end wars before they began, with blood if needed. The human diplomat straightened his jacket, brushed non-existent dust from his sleeve, and looked up at the gathered warlords. His eyes, once soft and patient, now gleamed with a coldness that sent a ripple of unease through even the bravest commanders. I trust we can begin negotiations now, he said softly. And in the silent, stunned hall of the galaxy's most brutal conquerors, not one dared to answer. The silence that fell over the war chamber was thick enough to drown in, broken only by the faint crackle of torches and the slow, deliberate breaths of the human who stood at the center. Tarka staggered back toward his throne, his foot throbbing, his ego bleeding even faster. The other warlords exchanged looks that ranged from confusion to something dangerously close to fear, though none of them would admit it. The human retrieved his cane with calm efficiency, tapping it lightly against the floor once more, the sound sharp and rhythmic like a countdown. For the first time in living memory, the mighty Tarkani's warlordship had been humiliated not by a rival fleet or a planetary uprising but by a single, unarmed human diplomat who had not even raised his voice. Still, old habits died hard, and wounded pride made for dangerous thinking among conquerors. A younger general, a scaled brute with gold bands around his tusks, barked something sharp in his native tongue, suggesting they seize the human immediately, strip him, and publicly display his broken body as a warning to Earth. A few others grunted in agreement, desperate to regain the momentum, to wipe away the stench of fear that had begun to infect the air. The human tilted his head, as if listening to the translation humming through his earpiece. His eyes flickered, amused, and for the first time, he spoke with a hint of something harder beneath his civility. That would be your second mistake today, he said. Several aliens shifted uncomfortably. Tarka growled low in his throat, about to order his guards forward when a deep, resonant alarm pulse went through the hall. All movement froze. A security warning, unlike anything the war barge had ever issued before. Tarka's second-in-command, a thickly armored creature named Varas, activated his wrist console and barked questions into it, his expression darkening as he listened. After a tense moment, he looked up, his voice brittle. External perimeter breach. Several outer defense satellites have gone dark. A murmur swept through the room. That was impossible. Their satellites were shielded against every known weapon, monitored by some of the most advanced surveillance systems in the quadrant. It would take a precision strike of incredible sophistication to neutralize them without triggering a full alert. The human tapped his cane once more and smiled without showing his teeth. I did suggest we avoid unnecessary bloodshed, he said. Tarka's hand hovered near the hilt of his ceremonial blade, but some part of him, some primal instinct buried under layers of arrogance, told him not to move. Not yet. Earth sends diplomats for peace, the human continued softly, stepping around the central table with the measured patience of a schoolmaster explaining something to unruly children. But Earth does not send weaklings. Our diplomats are selected for a different skill set. He paused, letting the words settle like dust on glass. We believe that those who negotiate peace must be able to enforce it without hesitation. Otherwise, diplomacy is a lie." The warlords listened, frozen between disbelief and the first tickling edge of panic. Varas muttered a rapid series of commands into his communicator, demanding status updates from external patrols, fleet security, even the maintenance crews. No answer came. One by one, the command feeds began to blink red across the chamber's central console. Outposts failing. Shuttles destroyed. Communications dead. Their mighty fortress, the heart of their galactic dominance, was being crippled from within while they sat laughing like fools. Someone in the back tried to slip away, a minor warlord with more cowardice than loyalty, but the heavy doors sealed shut with a hiss of finality. The human turned slightly, regarding him with the same expression one might give a misbehaving pet. 1,000 years ago, Earth was considered a backwater world, the human said, voice carrying without effort. We learned. We adapted. We endured. And we never forgot what it meant to be underestimated. His hand brushed the insignia over his heart, the crimson axe gleaming in the torchlight. You mistook courtesy for weakness. That was your first misstep. You mistook silence for fear. That was your second. And now you mistake your numbers for safety. That, he said, smiling thinly, will be your last. Tarka snarled, trying to summon the rage that had served him through decades of conquest. But there was no force behind it, no certainty. He barked for the guards to seize the human anyway, grasping at the last shred of authority he could find. 2 hulking alien guards approached, massive figures in gleaming battle armor. The human watched them with a look of almost pity. As they reached for him, he shifted his stance slightly. There was no explosion, no wild display of violence. Instead, the human moved with surgical precision, stepping inside one guard's grasp, twisting the armored wrist at an unnatural angle, and using his own momentum to hurl the alien into his partner. They crashed into the war chamber's pillars with a bone-shaking impact, armor crumpling like paper. The entire encounter took less than 3 seconds. The warlords finally understood what they were dealing with. Not a diplomat. Not even a soldier. Something older. Something engineered for moments exactly like this, where words failed and only swift, merciless violence could maintain order. Executioner was not a ceremonial title. It was a job description. Across the chamber, Krelth whispered an ancient word in his dying language, one that had not been spoken since the days when Earth's executioners had walked among the stars, Deathwalkers. The human straightened his jacket again, more annoyed by the scuffle than anything else. Shall we proceed with terms? He asked. His voice was mild, almost bored. But the warlords heard the iron beneath it, the razor wire wrapped around velvet. Tarka hesitated, glancing at the other generals, but found no support. Their faces had gone pale, their crests flattened against their skulls. The room, once filled with bravado and derision, now thrummed with the raw, electric smell of fear. Varas coughed, and dared to speak. What are your terms? He rasped. The human's smile widened slightly. Unconditional withdrawal from human space, he said. Full reparations for all damages inflicted by your raids. Recognition of Earth as a sovereign power in galactic law. Public broadcast of your surrender to all bordering systems. Failure to comply, he said, letting the words hang heavily, will result in the neutralization of this fleet and the annexation of your core worlds within one standard cycle. Tarka clenched his fists, blood pounding in his ears. He wanted to rage, to fight, to destroy this infuriating creature who had humiliated him before his peers. But another alarm blared, a different one this time. Internal breach. A whispered, terrified report crackled through the comms. Their main reactor bay was compromised. The self-destruct protocols were being overridden. They were no longer even in control of their own ship. They were trapped inside it, and the executioner held the keys. The human rested both hands on his cane, patient as a mountain. The choice, he said quietly, is yours. Negotiate, or be buried under the ruins of your own arrogance. And as the warlords stared into the human's steady, pitiless gaze, they realized that surrender was no longer a matter of pride. It was a matter of survival. The silence that followed was not the stiff, awkward kind born of indecision. It was heavier than that, thicker, the sort of silence that descends when death itself has pulled a chair up to the table and is merely waiting for someone to blink first. Tarka shifted in his throne, the old seat creaking under the weight of his armor and his wounded pride. His instincts, honed across decades of merciless conquest, screamed at him to attack, to crush this insolent human and reclaim his dominance through blood. Yet those same instincts, the ones that had kept him alive through betrayals, uprisings, and assassination attempts, whispered a harder truth into his mind, that attacking now would not be battle, it would be suicide. He was no longer facing a diplomat or a supplicant. He was staring down the barrel of a loaded gun disguised as a man. And somehow, Tarka knew that this human, this so-called executioner, had planned for every possible reaction before he ever stepped into this hall. The others felt it too. Warlords who had commanded fleets, who had raised worlds for refusing tribute, who had executed billions without remorse, now found themselves sitting back in their seats, their bravado evaporating like mist under a rising sun. Varas attempted to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. Even the most junior of commanders, Krelth, who had shown the earliest signs of suspicion, sat frozen, his wide eyes never leaving the human's steady, unimpressed gaze. The human let them stew in that silence, gave them no escape from it, because he understood what they did not. Sometimes the absence of action could be more devastating than violence itself. He did not pace, did not posture. He merely stood, weight slightly shifted on his cane, relaxed, as if giving them the courtesy to think. A courtesy he could rescind at any moment. Finally, Tarka managed a sound, a low growl torn from deep in his throat. "And what assurance do we have, Earthling," he said, voice dripping with venom, "that you are not bluffing? That you have not merely sabotaged a few satellites and poisoned our ears with tales of ancient ghosts?" His words hung defiantly, but his hands trembled slightly against the armrests. The human's mouth twitched at the corner, almost a smile, but not one born of humor. Without speaking, he reached into his jacket, slowly enough to avoid triggering a suicidal reaction from the jittery guards, and retrieved a small, battered device. He set it on the war table with a soft click, then pressed a button. The hologram that bloomed into the air above the table was not the expected image of a surrender document, or a list of demands. It was a live feed, projected in brutal clarity, showing the war barge's own outer hangars, where entire wings of their assault craft were now in flames. Ships that had been meticulously maintained for conquest missions now lay broken, their reactors slagged, their pilots nowhere to be found. The feed panned slowly, methodically, revealing not just sabotage but methodical, surgical destruction. Systems had been neutralized in ways no ordinary guerrilla force could manage. The destruction was precise, strategic, an artist's signature scrawled across a battlefield. "You mistake restraint for weakness," the human said, voice almost gentle. "You think because I have not leveled this ship around your heads that I am incapable of doing so. The truth is simpler. I am offering you a mercy you have never offered others." He clicked the device again, shifting the hologram to another view, internal schematics of the war barge's power cores. Several were now marked with pulsing red warnings. Tampered. Rigged. Ready. A simple signal, perhaps a single word, and the entire barge would become a tomb. Tarka's face darkened to a bruised shade of red, his claws digging into the throne's armrests deep enough to crack the material. The strength he prided himself on, the iron grip with which he ruled his domains, now felt meaningless. Power meant nothing when it could be ripped away by one patient, unassuming man standing with a cane and a blood-red insignia stitched over his heart. Varas sagged visibly, defeated without a single blade drawn against him. Krelth whispered in his own language again, the words falling like prayers to deaf gods. The human leaned forward slightly, tapping the cane once more against the floor. This time, the sound seemed to ripple outward like a hammer blow. "Understand this," he said quietly. "You have lost. Not because you are weak, though you are, but because you misunderstood the nature of strength. You thought strength was brutality. You thought it was domination. You thought it was the power to destroy. His voice grew colder, harder. Real strength is knowing when destruction is unnecessary. Real strength is standing in the center of your enemies, unarmed, and making them realize they have already destroyed themselves. Several of the lesser warlords dropped their gazes to the floor, no longer able to meet his eyes. Even Tarka, arrogant to his core, could not summon the words to refute him. Somewhere deep in the ship, another muted explosion sounded, rattling the floor under their feet. Not a catastrophic blast, but a warning shot, a reminder that the clock was ticking and that the executioner's mercy was finite. Slowly, with visible reluctance, Varas rose from his seat and crossed the chamber to the war table. His clawed hand hovered above the ancient surrender protocols embedded into the console. His mouth twisted in shame, but he pressed his palm down, initiating the formal sequence. One by one, others followed, some growling curses under their breath, some silent in their resignation. The console registered each of them with a sullen chime, sealing their fate in galactic record. When Tarka finally rose, his movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. He approached the table, standing across from the human. For a moment, it seemed he might yet lunge, might throw pride and reason aside for one last, doomed attempt to salvage his dignity. But then he looked into the human's eyes and saw not rage, not fear, but the calm certainty of someone who had ended better warriors than him without losing a moment's sleep. Slowly, Tarka laid his palm on the console, completing the chain of surrender. The human deactivated the device with a soft click, the images of destruction winking out one by one. He tucked it back into his jacket with the same lazy patience he had shown all along. His work was done. The war barge would broadcast the surrender across the nearby systems. Earth's name would spread with it, carried on a tide of shame and fear that would take root faster than any fleet could. "You have chosen wisely," the human said at last. He stepped back from the table, allowing them a sliver of dignity in their submission. He could have mocked them, could have belittled them as they had once done to him, but there was no need. Their humiliation was complete, and they would live with it far longer than any insult. The corridor outside the war chamber was vast, lined with towering statues of the greatest conquerors in the warlord clan's brutal history. Once, each stone titan had been a symbol of invincibility, of the sheer, merciless force that had crushed systems and reduced civilizations to rubble. Now, under the steady taps of the human's cane, those same monuments seemed to shrink and wither, their carved faces nothing more than relics of an arrogance that had finally met a sharper, quieter weapon. The human walked alone, no guards, no escorts, no ceremonial honor guard to see him off. Yet in that moment, there was no force more dominant within the entire war barge than his solitary figure. Every camera in the corridor tracked him, not by design but by the will of terrified operators who could not bring themselves to look away. They had seen enough to know that the thin thread holding their lives intact now rested entirely on his whim. As he moved toward the departure bay, the human reflected without much emotion on how predictable it all had been. Pride was the oldest weakness in the galaxy. It whispered lies to even the most intelligent species, convincing them that strength was eternal and that their victories were evidence of their own superiority rather than the failures of their enemies. He had seen it before on Earth's early colonial expeditions, had seen it etched into the ruins of empires that had once ruled solar systems with iron fists. And now he had seen it here, at the heart of the so-called invincible warlord clans. In the end, it always came down to the same truth. Pride made fools of giants and corpses of kings. He reached the departure bay without incident, though he noted with some amusement the way soldiers and officers scattered into side corridors at the mere sound of his approaching steps. No one dared challenge him. No one dared even meet his gaze. The executioner insignia on his chest may as well have been a blazing brand. Waiting in the center of the bay was a simple shuttle, marked with Earth's colors, untouched and fully fueled as per the surrender terms. A small, nervously trembling alien technician bowed deeply as the human approached, babbling assurances that the ship had been checked, cleared, and prepared for departure. The human acknowledged him with a nod, no words needed. Even a polite thank you would have felt cruel under the circumstances. He paused at the foot of the shuttle's ramp, turning slowly to face the now half-empty bay. High above, in observation decks shielded behind reinforced glass, senior staff and officers watched with a hollow mixture of relief and shame. Some still bristled with impotent hatred, others simply looked broken. The human tapped his cane once against the metal floor, the sharp sound ricocheting off the steel walls like a gunshot. "You have one cycle," he said calmly, knowing the message would be transmitted to every ear on the ship. "One cycle to dismantle your fleet, withdraw from human space, and pay reparations. One cycle to erase your arrogance, or be erased with it." He let the words linger in the air, final and unchallenged. As he turned and ascended the ramp, a low rumble shook the bay, not from weapons fire but from the cold, grinding reality of what had just occurred. In one meeting, without fleets or armies, Earth had dismantled the greatest military power of 3 sectors. With one man, a title, and an insignia. As the shuttle's engines began to hum, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Not for the victory itself, victories were transient, forgotten by history's long scroll, but for the message that would ripple outward across the stars. Earth was not a soft world. Earth remembered. Inside the shuttle's cockpit, he flicked switches with the ease of long practice. As the systems came online, a secure transmission request blinked on the console. Without much surprise, he opened it. The screen lit up with the familiar, weathered face of Director Ainsley of Earth's Diplomatic Defense Division. She did not smile, though he saw the faintest twitch of pride in her eyes. "Report," she said crisply. The human leaned back in his seat, resting both hands on the top of his cane, which now rested across his knees. "Surrender confirmed. Fleet disabled. Reparations agreed to. Public broadcast underway. Hostile capacity reduced to less than 20%. Contingency assets remain active should enforcement be necessary." Ainsley nodded once, jotting notes just out of frame. "Casualties?" she asked. "None. On either side," he replied. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in approval. "Efficient," she murmured. There was a brief pause, then her gaze sharpened. "And the insignia?" she asked. "Any reaction?" He smiled faintly. "As expected. Denial, then disbelief, then capitulation. No open recognition, but the old stories still linger." "Good," she said. "Let them linger. Fear is a currency more potent than blood these days." She leaned forward, her voice dropping lower. "Extraction team is en route. Stand by at the coordinates we provided. Maintain minimal engagement." "Acknowledge." "Acknowledge," he said. The transmission cut off, and for a moment the shuttle was filled only with the soft hum of the engines and the distant, mechanical groans of the massive war barge as it processed its own defeat. The human closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. The mission was over, but the work was never done. Somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between worlds, another arrogant force would rise. Another warlord would convince himself that Earth was soft, was weak, was ripe for conquest. And when they did, another executioner would walk quietly into their halls, bearing not flags of surrender but the steady, patient certainty of judgment. The shuttle lifted smoothly from the bay floor, rising into the shadowed expanse of the war barge's outer hangar. Through the viewport, he saw the desolate faces of alien crews watching him ascend, their pride broken, their futures reshaped by a single man's shadow. As he broke atmosphere and the endless black of space stretched around him, he allowed himself a final glance back at the fading war barge. Not with hatred. Not even with triumph. With understanding. In the end, every empire, every tyrant, every would-be conqueror, forgot the oldest rule of survival: never mistake the quiet ones for harmless ones. Setting course toward the rendezvous point, he engaged the autopilot and leaned back. Another cycle, another message delivered in a language older than words. Fear had a long memory. Earth's enemies would remember it for generations to come. And if they forgot, Earth would remind them the same way it always had. With silence, with certainty, and if needed, with an executioner's hand. The shuttle cruised through the blackness of space, a small, silent ghost among the stars. The war barge grew smaller behind him, just another broken monument swallowed by the endless dark. As he sat alone in the cockpit, hands resting on the cane across his knees, the human allowed the final pieces of the mission to settle into place. The surrender was complete, but the effects would not end with the signatures and broadcasts. In the weeks and months ahead, ripples would spread through every galactic council, every pirate syndicate, every arrogant empire that had once counted Earth among the primitive, the backward, the weak. Word would spread faster than light itself. Earth had sent a diplomat to the warlord clans, and the clans had knelt. Not because of fleets or weapons or treaties, but because of a single man wearing a crimson insignia stitched to his chest, and the terrifying certainty that he had not come to negotiate but to judge. The human leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. No celebration waited for him at the rendezvous point, no medals or banners or parades. That was not the way of executioners. Their victories were measured not in cheers but in silences, the silences of wars that never began, battles that never needed fighting, deaths that were averted simply because the right fear had been planted at the right moment. He had walked into the jaws of an empire built on violence, and left it on its knees, and yet when he returned to Earth, he would fade again into the shadows from which he came, nameless, faceless, a ghost within a system that understood the real cost of peace. The autopilot beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. Approaching extraction coordinates. In the distance, a small frigate shimmered into visibility, uncloaking only once it confirmed his shuttle's transponder signal. It was an old Earth design, compact, heavily armored, bristling with hidden weaponry. Practical. Silent. Deadly. Just like the men and women it served. He adjusted course slightly, aligning with the frigate's docking bay, and felt the familiar vibration as the shuttle locked onto the magnetic clamps. As he powered down the systems, a new transmission flickered onto the console. It was brief, just a single line of text sent on a secure frequency: confirm insignia authorization. Without hesitation, he pressed his thumb to the biometric reader embedded in the cane's head. A soft chime answered. The insignia authorization was not just a formality, it was a safeguard. In ancient times, an executioner's insignia had been the last thing a rebellious world saw before falling silent. In modern times, it was still a weapon more feared than any fleet Earth could build. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, and he stepped out into the cool, sterile air of the frigate. Two figures waited for him, clad in the nondescript gray armor of Earth's covert diplomatic corps. They saluted crisply as he approached, but there was no ceremony in it. It was simply recognition, one operator to another. One of them, a tall woman with a scar running from her temple to her jaw, stepped forward and handed him a simple, sealed case. Inside it, he knew, were the encoded records of the mission, the surrender protocols, the surveillance footage, the damage assessments. Proof, for those who needed it, that the warlord clans would trouble Earth no more. Without a word, he accepted the case and walked with them through the narrow corridors of the frigate. The ship was a ghost ship, operated by minimal crew, built for speed, stealth, and absolute deniability. No banners, no insignias, no markings tied it to Earth. It was as faceless as the missions it supported. They reached a small debriefing room, no larger than a closet, where a console awaited him. He placed the case into the reader slot, waiting as the system extracted and encrypted the data. A simple green light blinked once when it was complete. Mission acknowledged. Extraction underway. Return to shadow. The finality of it washed over him with the cold efficiency he had long since learned to accept. There were no medals for what he did. No celebrations. His name would not be etched into marble, or sung in the halls of victory. That was the point. Executioners did not exist in history. They existed in fear, in rumor, in whispered stories passed from one empire to the next like a warning shot across generations. Earth had no need for conquerors. It needed reminders. And he had just left a scar deep enough to be remembered long after the warlords who mocked him were dust. The frigate's engines engaged, propelling them away from the ruined remains of the warlord fleet. Through a small viewport, he could see the faint glimmer of the broken war barge, adrift now, no longer a predator but a monument to miscalculation. Somewhere out there, Messages were already being sent, alliances reconsidered, invasions cancelled. Somewhere, alien leaders were gathering in hushed rooms, watching the footage Earth had ensured would leak, asking themselves if it was worth it. Asking if Earth was still the vulnerable, isolated world they once thought it to be. And somewhere deep within those rooms, someone would remember the blood-red axe stitched into a diplomat's jacket, and decide that perhaps it was wiser to turn their ambitions elsewhere. He rested his head briefly against the cool metal wall beside the viewport, letting the hum of the ship's engines lull him. Another mission complete. Another bullet dodged. Another piece of peace bought not with treaties or compromises, but with carefully measured fear. The stars stretched out before him, endless and unyielding. There would be more threats. More would-be conquerors. There always were. And when they came, Earth would send another executioner. Or perhaps he would go again himself. His hands were still steady. His mind still sharp. His purpose as clear as it had ever been. When the ship finally entered slipstream, vanishing into the unseen currents of space, he allowed himself one last look back toward the dim starfield where the war barge had once floated, arrogant and untouchable. Now it was just another speck in the void, forgotten by time but remembered in fear. He tapped his cane lightly against the floor once, twice, 3 times, a slow, steady rhythm that echoed faintly down the empty corridor. Then he closed his eyes and waited, knowing that even as he drifted among the stars, his message was already seeded deep into the bones of the galaxy. Earth is not weak. Earth does not forget. And when the quiet ones come knocking, it is already too late.